People who have made the transition from this life to the next life are anxious to tell us about what their lives are like there. They communicate through mediums and directly to their loved ones on this side of life about their transition to the next life, where they're living, who they're living with, what conditions are like there, what they do for recreation, what they do for their occupations, and a variety of other things about their lives in the afterlife. Today we have many thousands of these communications. We now know without a doubt what everyday life is like in the afterlife or heaven. In this video, you will hear statements from people now living in the afterlife about their living conditions there. Hello, I'm Dr. R. Craig Hogan, President of the Afterlife Research and Education Institute and Seek Reality Online. In the afterlife, our living conditions are shaped by the moral character we developed during our life on earth. People who are loving and compassionate live in a realm called by the Theosophists Summerland. It has pleasant circumstances with others who are also loving and compassionate. Summerland is full of love and void of discord and loneliness. On the other hand, people who on earth were violent, cruel, and despicable find themselves with others who are violent, cruel, and despicable. Their surroundings match their mental and spiritual condition. The conditions are darker, with unpleasant odors and regular unpleasant sounds coming from their bickering and fights. Living in darker, unpleasant circumstances is not the result of a judgment, and certainly is not any form of hell. The unfortunate people in these regions and those with them are creating the environment through their thoughts and dispositions. Elizabeth Fry, who led the 18th century reformation of United Kingdom prisons, explains in a Leslie Flint direct voice session in 1963 that people coming into the life after this life find themselves in circumstances that fit their mental and spiritual status. Leslie Flint was a direct voice medium in the 20th century. Flint had an ectoplasmic voice box that formed on his shoulder, so the person in spirit could project thoughts into it that would emerge as speaking. The voice box had all the characteristics of the vocal mechanism, including vocal cords, air going over the vocal cords as breathing to make them vibrate the air, and mouth parts. The recording of Fry speaking follows.
As a man sows, so shall he reap. And if a man in your world, by his very nature and the condition of his life, creates a condition of havoc and unhappiness, if he is by nature only concerned with material things, then obviously when he comes here, he will find himself on a plane which is in some respect very similar to us. He will, as it were, be living again a very material conception, if you like, of life. Because after all, the man has not changed. Death doesn't necessarily change a person immediately. A person is still, in outlook, very much the same, and until such time as man himself begins to realize that he is living in a condition of life that he himself has built, then until he changes his outlook and his attitude, until he begins to search within himself to discover the faults therein and begin to rectify them, he will be living in a condition very similar in many respects to the earth. He will be living in a material, mental state, because after all, that is exactly what happens to individuals when they leave your world. They live in a condition of life created by their state of mind. Of course, there are exceptions, as there must well be, but the average person who has lived a reasonably good life will find himself in an atmosphere which is congenial and pleasant. He will find that he will have every opportunity to experience many things that perhaps were denied him on earth. For instance, you may have someone who, by the very circumstances of their earthly life, were unfortunately made to live a very humdrum, unhappy, dreary existence. Well, that person, because they themselves have by their very nature endeavoured to be helpful and kind and considerate to others, who sacrifice perhaps themselves for others, will find a very happy form or condition of existence, and the opportunities that were denied them on earth, those opportunities will be presented here.
Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson, speaking from the Life After This Life through medium Anthony Borgia, explains in this excerpt from Borgia's book, Life in the World Unseen, that his spiritual development affected the living conditions in his new life.
What I saw was my old home that I had lived in on the earth plane, my old home, but with a difference. It was improved in a way that I had not been able to do to its earthly counterpart. The house itself was rejuvenated, as it seemed to me from a first glance, rather than restored, but it was the gardens round it that attracted my attention more fully. They appeared to be quite extensive, and they were in a state of the most perfect order and arrangement. By this I do not mean the regular orderliness that one is accustomed to see in public gardens on the earth plane, but that they were beautifully kept and tended. There were no wild growths or masses of tangled foliage and weeds, but the most glorious profusion of beautiful flowers so arranged as to show themselves to absolute perfection. Of the flowers themselves, when I was able to examine them more closely, I must say that I never saw either their like or their counterpart upon the earth of many that were there in full bloom. Numbers were to be found, of course, of the old familiar blossoms, but by far the greater number seemed to be something entirely new to my rather small knowledge of flowers. It was not merely the flowers themselves and their unbelievable range of superb colourings that caught my attention, but the vital atmosphere of eternal life that they threw out, as it were, in every direction. And as one approached any particular group of flowers, or even a single bloom, there seemed to pour out great streams of energizing power, which uplifted the soul spiritually and gave it strength, while the heavenly perfumes they exhaled were such as no soul clothed in its mantle of flesh has ever experienced. All these flowers were living and breathing, and they were, so my friend informed me, incorruptible.
A man calling himself Dr. Frank said that he was killed in the Dachau death camp during World War II. He spoke in a Leslie Fund session on April 6, 1964. In this recording, he explains that the world in the Life After This Life is created for the individual by their thoughts. As a result, people create the world they expect to have without realizing it.
I have a very small house, but it suffices for me. I am not anxious for grand things. I am happy with simple things and simple people. When I say simple, it doesn't mean to say that they are simple, in the sense perhaps that some people mean that word, but simple in their desire for what I suppose you would call material things, which after all, though they are in a sense spiritual, in a sense also, they are material because, for instance, my house is very real. It is solid as your house would be, and it is small but quite pretty. It is what I suppose you would call pleasant. It has only 4 rooms. It is small like a country house. It has a very attractive garden because I love nature and the flowers and the birds which sing in the trees. I don't know how one can hope to make people in your world sometimes understand. When we talk about a house that is material, and within the house, there are things which you would expect to find in a house. To me, they are all the things that would be necessary to make it comfortable, such as chairs and things of that nature. But we do not need heat to warm ourselves. There are no seasons in the same way in which you have. There is no intense cold. Neither is there intense heat. Therefore, we do not need fires, for there is no winter. At the same time, there is warmth and there is light, and yet it is not the light of the sun, for I do not see the sun in the sense that you can look into your sky and see in the sky the sun. But here there is illumination which is kindly and soft and beautiful. It illuminates the world in which we exist. And the flowers that grow, though to my knowledge they are not planted, yet they are permanently there. And they have their own beauty. They do not need to be nursed or tended, and they are never cut to put, as you would, into the house. All nature seems to be able to take care of itself. Man does not have to tend, although there are those who will and do, for a time, possibly because they assume it is necessary to tend their gardens.
When we transition to the life after this life, we will live in circumstances that fit our disposition as loving, compassionate people. Some who are cruel, self-centered, and hateful will live in less pleasant circumstances. It isn't a punishment, and it certainly is not a hell. People who live in the lower realms are there because they are creating the environment by their dispositions. Most people coming from Earth will live in pleasant surroundings called Summerland, where you will live in comfort and love with your family, friends, and pets.